for decades. Julia Grosso from Vancouver to win it for Canada! Canada came! Canada conquered! Canada gold at Tokyo 2020!
You're listening to the Northern Fútbol Podcast, your home for everything Canadian soccer, with Brendan Dunlop, Alex Gangué-Ruzic, and here's your host, Ben Steiner.
Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Fútbol Podcast. It's episode 190 of NFP. Ben Steiner alongside Brendan Dunlop and Alex Gangué-Ruzic, and once again, those two are in the studio at the Wall Center in Vancouver, and I am stuck here in Toronto. And you guys have some pretty cool swag on as well, it looks like.
Yeah, we know that. I don't think you've ever had more FOMO about not being in your hometown of Vancouver. But because I'm out here, and well, Alex, you're always here. We had the privilege of attending the Vancouver Rise FC unveiling last night. You were missed, my man. But the vibe was immaculate, I would say.
So the martinis were good.
The martinis were very good. Yeah, they were teal themed. There was a real citrus. It was kind of like a blend of the logo and the crest.
Which I should have known. They were turquoise when we walked in, and then of course, like the logo comes out. It's turquoise on the screen.
Did you go in there fearing like, oh no, another red logo?
Oh no, I wasn't worried about that,
Right.
but I was, just kind of hard to tell.
I felt like that was the giveaway though. The drink was the giveaway. The walk-in flute. The sour martini, that was the giveaway.
Yeah, should have been at least more for me, but hey, it turned out pretty well. I mean, we got some NSL talking here. Obviously, we got a big squad to talk about as well.
Yeah, big squad. Lot to get to, Ben.
Yeah, of course. There was also the CanMNT squad unveiling for the September friendlies this morning. But I mean, we'll touch on that Vancouver NSL logo first, I guess. But I really like the three caps on the top of it because you can see that connection with the Whitecaps brand, even though it's not the same club. Or it's the same club, sort of, but not the same team. But its own identity, but also related. I don't know. That part really stood out to me, and I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, while it's not the total peak shield, it does look like it's from the same family, right? The crests came from the same font, albeit they're unique and they've got their own differences. So, I mean, the Rise is big. Yeah. The font of Rise is big. I would have liked somehow Vancouver to be a bigger font, more prominent, but I mean, obviously it's a longer name. It wasn't going to fit in. But I think they did a real good job of it. Smashing job.
I'll say usually they do the twin logos, right, where it's like very similar. It's more siblings. Like you can tell they're related, just maybe not as obvious at first glance. But that's kind of good, right? It's that brand association. We'll see if it pays off from year one, but you could definitely feel the excitement. Like it was cool. They brought out a bunch of the local supporters, Rain City, Southsiders, Albion, etc. The Vancouver South Sisters, I think were there. It was great to see because those are obviously a lot of the supporters will want to dive into both clubs from day one.
Mm-hmm. Cape Ernest was hosting, and Steph Labbe was pushed by the supporters to make some type of acknowledgement to Christine Sinclair, to which she just smiled and nodded and avoided the question from Kate. But they'll announce their first signing. She said she's hopeful within a few weeks, and I think there's a lot of people expecting it to be a Canadian international, a former Canadian international. So I'm excited for that next unveiling.
Well, Kristen Sinclair was on CTV last night, and she did say that there's something potentially, propping the door open, a new opportunity after Portland, and didn't quite want to break any news on CTV Morning Live, but it looked like she was teasing potentially something there, and of course she was on CTV, so presumably she was in Vancouver for the announcement, which is something to think about, but it didn't sound like she was there.
If she was there, she was in the
spot her.
VVIP room. Nobody saw her because people would have gone nuts.
So we saw a lot of people. We saw Kevin Blue. We saw some other people. We did not see Christy.
Yeah, Kevin Blue was there. I didn't see. I think we were all looking for Christine Sinclair as well. So I don't know about the CTV hit. You sure she wasn't doing that from Portland?
It was in studio, and last I checked, CTV ain't got no studio in Portland. So.
Ain't got no studio in Portland. No, it's the times are changing in the media. Maybe it was a hologram, man. Maybe it was. You watch the Olympics on CBC. Maybe it was a hologram.
We'll jump into the CanMNT as well, and then we'll touch again on the NSL. But Jesse Marsch and Canada Soccer announced the roster for the September friendlies against the United States and Mexico. It's an intriguing 23-player list with mostly top-choice guys outside of Ishmael Kone, Tejan Buchanan, and Junior Hoylett, who are all nursing injuries. The big additions are Hajduk Split's Niko Sigur and Sporting KC's Stephen Afrifa. Thoughts on Sigur and Afrifa? Last week we seemingly foreshadowed Sigur committing to the CanMNT.
I'll say, Brendan, just 'cause last week we talked about rundowns. It's Ben's rundown this week. See, very intriguing squad. Just the way you said that, I was, oh yeah, Ben did this rundown.
It's a standard, it's his standard adjectives. Yeah, exactly.
Go-to.
These are the same ones. Yeah, I mean, we talked about Sigur before he declared. Our timing is immaculate or incredible. I think, man, Sigur's a great addition to have in the pipeline, to have in the system now, right? He's someone obviously that Jesse Marsch has been looking at, and someone who's having new opportunities now. That things are a little back to normal in the football world as opposed to a couple of years ago, as we discussed when he'd gone across, still in the pandemic period. So it's good that Jesse Marsch gets to use this window, and because of the injuries you spoke about, there's a couple spots on the roster that probably wouldn't have been there otherwise. So it's great timing for both him and Afrifa.
Yeah, I think Sigur's the big one. I think he was one where, of course, he was an exciting dual national for long-term reasons, as they all are. But I think he might have very well, as if you're looking at the list of the guys, the Kolioshos, the Jebbisons, your wish list of dual nationals, so to speak. He was just like my number one in terms of fit, just because Jebbison, cool, it'd be great to have him. You don't need another striker immediately right now. With Luka Koleos, it would be great to have him. Absolutely, he's one of those where he could be one of the best of the crop. You don't need him right now, right? Like, you'd want him, but you don't need him. Niko Sigur, there's a genuine need for defensive midfielders, what it could do to, free up Stefan Eustáquio, to pair with that trio of Ismail Kone, to give you a different look in possession, give you more depth. That's what I love about this Niko Sigur addition. It's great for the future. He's only 20. He's got pro reps. He's going to grow. He's going to develop. He feels like someone that will eventually move into a top 5 league and do good things. But he helps this team now. And I think that's what's so exciting, that there's that path. You're not worrying about, you're committing him now just for 2-3 years. No, this is someone that helps today. So that was probably the big thing that stood out. Afrifa is a fascinating one. I think he was someone that's kind of come up on my radar the last few weeks, just because he caught form in the Leagues Cup group stage a bit, and the end of the MLS run before Leagues Cup. They've just come back. He got an assist on the weekend. And I was just kind of wondering, because, of course, there's a lot of forwards. So right now it's kind of a period where you need to be exceptional to get in, and maybe he wasn't on the cusp of that yet. Then you quietly pull back some of the details. You realize that he's been having a quietly very good season for SKC. They're not the greatest team, yet he's putting up, goal contribution every 90 minutes. That's pretty good. He's been playing on the wing, too, not as an out-and-out striker. He's naturally a striker, but he's been playing on the wing, left and right for KC, so no problems there. Flexible player. And looking at his underlying numbers, he's been a very, very good dribbler, top-line dribbler among all MLS players. He shoots the ball a lot. He's just very, very solid player is what stands out. It's we're kind of joking before the show. A lot of these college guys, it's almost a prototype. I don't know if it's because it's an NCAA coaches thing where they're sitting there before the season, you want to get drafted, you better be good at everything, because that's what MLS scouts want. It works because these guys have come out and they're very, very well-rounded. You can kind of see that in his game. He's been trusted defensively. That's why he's been playing on the wing. But I think his kind of spectacular attributes, from what I've seen, he has a shot on him, and he can dribble and take on guys. Of course, I was lucky enough to see him live here a couple months ago when SKC came to town, and he's definitely one of those where you can see a bit of intrigue in the player.
No Ike Ugbo, though. How upset are you, Ben?
Yeah, that one is surprising. We have a few questions on Ike Ugbo not being in the squad, and it seems like maybe he's not interested in representing Canada anymore. I don't want to read too much into, a September friendly squad after a major tournament, but maybe there's something there in terms of his interest in representing the country, because you see the other big players accept these call-ups. Jonathan David and Alphonso Davies never seemingly turned down a call-up, even for these friendly windows. And Ugbo, we didn't see at the Copa America. That was his choice. We're not seeing him here this window, and maybe that's his choice as well. So there could be something there. But on Afrifa, I've liked what I've seen from him in MLS. He seems like a player that can sort of elevate for a good Twitter clip here and there, because he's a well-rounded player, but he can score a fantastic goal. And he's elevated his game to a good level in MLS, and I think that's the type of player that is worth a look in these type of windows. Jason Russell-Rowe and Samuel Piette, they're not on the team. But when you're only calling up a limited number of players, you very much know what you have in Samuel Piette, and you kind of know what you have in Jason Russell-Rowe. He's been in good form for Columbus. You don't necessarily want to disrupt that either for Jason Russell-Rowe because he's playing some of the best football of his life. And so, well, on the one hand, it would be good to call him up to the national team. I think taking a look at a player like Afrifa, who you don't necessarily know in this setup yet, is worthwhile. And there's not really anything to lose in this situation.
He's also been playing a lot of football, Jason Russell-Rowe, too, right? So I think that there was definitely a conversation. He's obviously still in Marsch's plans. I certainly wouldn't read anything into that. But I think it shows good management in general to prioritize your players throughout their club season, right? Because, I mean, Jason Russell-Rowe is someone in a couple of years you would love to have at or near his best, and someone who's not coming into the World Cup at 71% because he's played 60 games like for the last 2 years in a row, right? And I mean, look at Columbus. Like they're in every cup competition. They've made the final of the Champions Cup, the Champions League. They made the final of the Leagues Cup. Like there's a lot of miles on any of those crew players, right? So for this situation, the friendlies, you want to see Afrifa for the first time, which is nice, and you probably want to see a little more of Tani, who's still working his way into the mix full time. So I think that's just good management.
Well, for Russell-Rowe, it's worth noting too. It's timing because Columbus are in so many competitions. He didn't actually play that much during League's Cup, only 38 minutes. I mean, he scored a big goal at a big time, but because of that, they're way behind on fixtures because of League's Cup and because of the Champions Cup. So they're actually playing during the international window too. So I wonder if that was one of those where,
for sure,
Marsch only called in 4 strikers this time. He dropped it from 5 because Afrifa, I think he's going to slot in on the wing just because the wing depth's really light this camp. I think it was also circumstance of, do you really want to be the 5th striker? We kind of saw you this summer. We saw what you can bring. Go get minutes for Columbus. He might actually play a good chunk of it's against Seattle on the 7th, the same day Canada plays US. Hopefully Russell-Rowe gets an 80-90 in that game. And, because it's tough, obviously, with the Cucho and Rossi and Ramirez all getting minutes for the crew. And I think that kind of goes for Ike Ugbo, too. I think it's one of those where I think he's just right now in this moment, he probably wasn't in the top 4 if you're doing the 4. And I think for him, he just made that permanent move to Sheffield Wednesday. It took longer than he probably hoped. So he's kind of playing catch up. He scored his first goal today. I mean, albeit against a League 2 club in the Cup, but it was still a goal, good performance. I think it was probably Marsch as well, like just saying, look, like just get your form, get your rhythm. You can very much be in the mix down the road. No reason to bring you across the pond, again, for maybe being the 4th, 5th choice striker. And that's kind of how it is with the pool now. The pool's a little deeper. Like you kind of need to either bring exceptional performances, kind of like how Tani Oluwasi has done to really cement that spot, like he's been scoring, or it's like Afrifa where you bring a bit of something else. Like he's more of a winger. He can play anywhere across the front line. He brings a bit of something else because that's the kind of the level of the pool right now.
And Jesse Marsch also spoke to reporters earlier today. And Brendan, just your thoughts on Marsch's comments.
Well, I wasn't on the call, Ben. So in general, it's more. I say more of the usual, but a little more from Marsch that we get every time. I kind of feel like I'm the Kool-Aid sipper with him. He's like Prince and Herdman, right? And I kind of just eat up all that he's saying. So I think, man, he's hitting all the right notes. And I do think that there's I'm excited at the timing for this. Obviously, he's playing the States. He's be excited to go up against them. But with everything that's happening down there, like he knows that if not for him and Kevin Blue, U.S. Soccer don't get Mauricio Pochettino, right? I said that to Kevin Blue last night. I was like, that doesn't happen if you don't do this. Not a chance. And he just laughed and like, oh, okay. I don't even think he said anything to it. Just kind of like laughed awkwardly. But it's true. Like this doesn't happen if Kevin Blue doesn't set that in motion and set a new bar here in North American international soccer with finding a way to bring Jesse Marsch here to Canada. So I'm excited to see them go up against the States in general. As soon as that fixture was booked, the only disappointing thing really is that it's not in Canada. It'd be cool if that game was in Canada, but in general, like it's not going to feel like a friendly for Marsch and the team. Like they're really going to want to win that game.
Well, the only problem is the U.S. don't have the coach. Pochettino's not going to be there, so it's like, how can...
Did they say for sure? Because I thought yesterday it was he's going to be there.
Even if he gets hired, like, which is inevitable, they're obviously working on the details. Like, it's just not happening at this point. It's going to be an interim. I think that's been almost confirmed, if not.
I thought this week the new stuff was that he was going to be in place in time.
Okay.
Who knows,
Well, I
man?
mean, we'll see. But
It's all legal from the sounds of things. By the time you listen to this, there'll be new news.
Exactly. But it was funny because there was a U.S.-based reporter, Stephen Goff, of course, Washington Post, and he asked Jesse a couple times, like, hey, so playing the U.S., does it mean anything? And Jesse Marsch, as he does, just like kind of through cold water, he's like, look, it doesn't really matter. When the anthems play, I'll sing the Canadian one, and he'll say maybe he'll start to get weird when the American one comes on. But for what it's worth, Jesse Marsch, and again, that's kind of one of his strengths. He's like, look, I'm just going to focus on doing our job. For him, the job is to go out, win some games, take the next step. And he had some very interesting reflections, right, throughout the press conference, just talking about some of the things he learned. One of the things he said that I found interesting, I kind of asked him, like, what are some of the things he learned from Copa America that he wants to implement? And one, he said he loved how over the first few games when they weren't rotating as much, he liked that they built an identity. And he said he really felt that against Uruguay when they rotated the squad. And he said he thought he saw the same team out there. Like, you saw the identity, you saw what you want. I think that's interesting because he's kind of at a point where he's like, look, I realize I can trust these guys. And not just my 11, 12, 13. I can start to trust 14, 15, 16. And I think he kind of hinted that this window should be fascinating in terms of like player rotation. Like he admitted, like, yeah, we're going to have 2 different lineups between the games. We're going to rotate. We're going to look at things. We're going to build. I thought that was very interesting because, of course, this first few months were just so much like big games. You have to go this. You have to do this. You kind of have to go in. And it feels like he's had some time to reflect, and it's going to show in his next camp.
We'll jump into listener questions as well. From Afrikaans on the CanMNT side, how do you feel about the friendly rosters, and were there enough names, or is Marsch right to explore the roster in the second camp that he has? Of course, that being the October window. And from Paul Newmark, to your mind, any notable CanMNT exclusions or surprises? Brendan, you mentioned Ike Ugbo, but I do think that the focus on having the best players for this camp, especially as you play some of those bigger teams in terms of CONCACAF and the US and Mexico, that's important. Not that results are the key here, but sort of establishing yourself within the region that is, in effect, most important to you is going to be important. And continuing that transition with a few new faces that we're seeing in Sigur and Afrifa, with that core of the team that we've seen already, of the the top players, of the Davies, the Davids, the players that have built the program to where it is today.
Yeah, I mean, the scheduling and timing plays such a big part, right? The fact that it's in the U.S., the fact that it's towards the end of this MLS season, that most of the teams are in a break, but the best team in MLS is not, gives them some options. I think he's managed it really well, and to see them go up against the U.S. and Mexico, which are still the two biggest teams, or amongst the two of now the 3 biggest teams in the region. It's a good timing for him to see his team out against those 2. Like, I'm kind of glad that it's now after the success of Copa as opposed to having this before. Like we all would have been hyped if Jesse Marsch's first game was against the U.S. But to be honest, that would have sucked. The timing falls really kindly to both him and from a tactical perspective, I think, and timing with his familiarity with the team, and from an entertainment perspective, it's going to be bigger now. Maybe not as big because Poch isn't going to be there according to AGR on the case, but there'll still be enough intrigue with that game. The timing falls good.
So we'll keep an eye. But I think one thing I like for Marsch as well is that familiarity is needed. We have to remember it's technically, like Afrikaans mentioned, like it's just a second camp. Like it's something where he's still like, okay, he's not at the point where, hello, my name is Jesse, but he's still at a point, like
still getting to know guys. You're still getting to, they're getting to know you.
Like, what's your go-to pasta order? Like, what it's little things like that. Like, do you like the window seat or do you like the aisle seat? Like, you're still getting to really know these guys, so it's good to have them in. And
right. I don't know your go-to pasta order. I feel like it's not very complicated. You're like a Pomodoro guy.
I've been loving like carbonaras and like creamy mushroom pastas lately.
Ben, mac and cheese. What's Ben?
I don't eat much pasta, only when I'm carb loading before races, but usually just, straight pasta with some tomato sauce.
There we go. Ragu, out the jar.
Boring.
Straight out the 100%. Yeah, I know. It's okay, Ben.
So that's it. Jesse Marsch, he's learning that. He wants to maybe just get that chemistry, get all that going. And, like, the reality is, too, like, he doesn't fully know this group in the sense of, partnerships. What are this? We've been talking a lot about certain people on the field. Do they fit together? He knows his back 4. He can trust it. But, what's the best midfield combination? What's the best striker partnership? Are there other guys who are maybe going to surprise him, like Afrifa or like Sigur? Is he going to come in and kind of change the way he plays? I think that's very important to remember, that he's still figuring that stuff out, especially because at Copa America, he had to kind of go trusted first choice, not much rocking the boat. That I think really that Uruguay game probably opened his eyes of like, oh, I really got some players here like Ahmed, Oluwasi, like Chouanier. I'm going to have a look at these guys. I'm going to have to figure out, do they fit in our plan, even if it's, super subs? Is it starters? And I think that's going to be crucial. Otherwise, in terms of the other question, that was probably the big thing that stands out. There weren't really any big omissions, big surprises.
I wasn't expecting that, though. I mean, we're past Borjan and Vitoria, and I mean, you're talking about Hoylett. Yeah, Hoylett probably would have got in the squad, I mean, based on form, but I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't kind of get back in again either at the same time.
I said everyone's like who's out is injured. The only guy I could think if I was to reach for a surprise, because I think, of course, any surprises are dual nationals, but of course we don't know how that's going. For what it's worth, Jesse Marsch was asked about Daniel Jebbison, and he gave a bit of a very interesting smile, and he was just like, "Yeah, I'm aware of Daniel Jebbison. We're doing our best. I'll leave it at that." So like, he's obviously tried. The only one I thought of was Luc de Frugal, just in the sense that this would have been a good opportunity again. If it's friendlies, you can get him out there, you can get the reps, but also it's probably just stay and potentially maybe there's a club situation he's figuring out. Maybe there's something like that. So even then, it's hard to think of it as a surprise.
And from Canadian dad strength, how do you think Sam Adekugbe will fit into the Jesse Marsch squad? It seems that Davies is locked into that left back spot, but is there any chance that changes? And I do think that if you have Adekugbe and you can push Davies up, that's potentially something that could work. But I also liked, as listeners will know, that partnership that we saw of Davies and Schaffelberg on that left side this year. And, Sam Adekugbe comes into that situation and mixes that up a little. But I do think it offers some depth at this point. Adekugbe, he is injury riddled. You can't necessarily rely on him consistently moving forward in the same way that I think you can in terms of a Schaffelberg and Davies combination. And, you could potentially throw Liam Miller in that as well. We saw positivity from there this summer. Luka Koleosho, if he comes into the picture, is also going to be probably around that side. That Sam Adekugbe can play a depth role on this team, but I don't think it's going to be the role that he played in that 2022 cycle.
I just love that Ben read my question from my shadow account, that he didn't, and get a full answer. How many of those full answers do we get from Ben off the top? He's like, before I get to you two Goombas, let me give you my take. Do you not think, Ben, that you're talking about Adekugbe being like second or third, down the list here? Don't you think that that's still his job to win back? Like, I still think that Marsch is looking at this like, man, show me that you're the number one guy.
I think there's an opportunity there, but when you look at his injury history over the last 2 years, really since the World Cup, is not someone that you necessarily want to rely on, because if you build something that's looking good and he comes up short with an injury, well, then you're kind of stuck. You have to consider where he's at physically, and clearly he's not the most durable player. And, I love what Sam Adekugbe can bring when he's fit and when he's on his day, but those days seem to be, few and far between in a way that they weren't in the 2022 cycle when he was in Europe and now he's in MLS. I don't know if there's, something to read into there, but he's just not the same player as he was back then. And what he can offer when he is playing, yes, but how often is he going to be reliable?
So in general, so you're not thinking of him as being a reliable person for 2026?
I think he could be on the squad, but I don't think he's starting.
I think that's fair. I mean, and I would argue too, he hasn't shown that he should be starting in 26. But I think he's still, for what he's done previously and the tools that he's got, I think he's still, to me, it's his job to lose right now. So, like, to me, he should be starting. That's a partnership.
As long as you're a guy that jumps into a snowbank, then you should be starting.
No, I just think that he's a super interesting case, right? Like he's been through a lot in his life since the World Cup happened, right? With the earthquake and leaving Turkey and going to Galatasaray, and I mean I'm still surprised he's here. Yeah, I really thought he would have stayed at Galatasaray, who were very keen on him, or he would have had other opportunities in Europe. But I understand, wanted to come home in general. I would understand wanting to be closer to home, given what he went through. And then he's had the injuries with the Whitecaps, and it's he hasn't adjusted to life in MLS, back in MLS, the way I thought that he would, and the way I think a lot of people hoped. But he's still, good enough to be in this team. And as I say, I think still the benefit of the doubt that it's his job to lose, and that's a partnership or varying an element of a few partnerships that I'm curious to see because we didn't get to see for Copa.
And with that, we'll go to Alex or Sam Adekugbe, according to one guy in an Edmonton bar after Azteca.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Someone thought you were Sam Adekugbe?
Yes.
Oh man, I think we did that last time I was in here.
Yeah.
People don't know anything.
I mean, hey, Sam's a good-looking fella, so I guess I could take it as a compliment, right? So, for Adekugbe, I think we also can't get too caught up in the whole injury thing in the sense that it's just been 2 injuries and it's just timing. Because obviously he came back from Galatasaray with a bit of a knock or something. He comes back, he just took time to get up to speed. He gets the knee injury, and it just sounds like from that perspective it was a bit. Like it was just tough to manage. And I think then he comes back, he finally gets fit, and then he takes an ill-advised long shot that blows out his calf, and then he's out for a few weeks after. You have to remember, it's only been 12 months since this whole injury trouble really started, and it's been 2 injuries that just kind of got dragged out over very weird timelines. And I'm just curious to see, because I think the Whitecaps have done a very good job of managing him in the sense that it's been so prudent, frustratingly prudent of he plays a game, he's not even in the squad the next day, and then they've been doing well to integrate him in, and I think that's going to be all right. If that pays off, I think he'll be good, because what I'll say for Adekugbe, I think he can very much be in the mix in 2026, because if he's healthy, of course that's an if, I guess you could say that about anyone. If Alphonso Davies is healthy, he's going to have a heck of a 2026 World Cup. You can say that about any player in the world. But for Adekugbe, his game's going to age well. I like the way he's going to age as it goes on, because he's still got good pace for his age. He shows it, and it's terrifying. So it's his first game back from the calf injury. He made a ridiculous sprint. It's chill. You just came back from a calf injury. Let's take it easy. Yeah. But when that pace starts to go, he is a very good passer, very sharp, and I think he could offer a bit of something as a fullback that's different to Davies. And I think for Jesse Marsch, just having Adekugbe back, it's not so much Adekugbe winning Davies' spot. I think it's just giving Marsch flexibility of, maybe you can move Davies up in the attack in certain games based on what Adekugbe gives you. Maybe Adekugbe is more of a super sub. You bring him in for the last 30 to shut things down and not have to worry about Davies. Or who knows, maybe because the game's super stretched out, you throw Davies up front and you put Adekugbe in there. I think Adekugbe is going to be more of a weapon versus he's battling for a certain spot in the roster. And I think that's why he's going to be so key ahead of 2026. But I think for him, the beauty of it for Marsch, for the Whitecaps, it's just about taking his time and making sure he's 100% before he assumes any role. Because that's what's going to, he's just had such a weird year and a half between how the Galatasaray season, all the injuries, that he just needs a bit of a reset.
And from North Van Steve, with the possible arrival of Jebbison and the competition from Bear, Tanny, Ugbo, and Jason Russell-Rowe, how much longer do we expect Larin to be the out-and-out starter for this CanMNT?
I mean, he's still a guy now.
I think he'll still remain.
The guys you just mentioned aren't even in this team. Right?
He'll still remain the guy, I think. Jonathan David is probably the guy, as much as, I said what I said last week that got some good play on Twitter with our audience, but if Jonathan David can carry that the form that he's shown at club level over to the CanMNT at the same level that he shows with club, I think he's the guy, and I think we're going to probably see either him or Larin, because that combination, as we've seen over the last couple of years, doesn't necessarily work in the Canadian shirt.
You can't smile while saying, we'll talk about your take from last week. Now it looks like it was intentional.
Yeah.
Genuinely, I don't get as excited when he scores for Lille as I used to, because it just doesn't matter as much to me, because it doesn't translate in the same way.
Yeah, you're frustrated.
Yeah.
You feel like, he's out there doing it for somebody else, but he's not doing it for you. That's I get that. I get that feeling.
Sort of, honestly.
Scratch my back, but
Yeah, if Lille's sponsored by SodaStream or someone that you feel invested in, and maybe it's different. I don't know. If there's no connection to that club for you,
maybe he doesn't like red either, or the red and blue. Maybe it's just given too much American flag their kits.
I'm American.
Yeah, but this is the Canadian national team you're talking about.
It's pretty red. I don't think American when I see the two of them.
Oh, it's very blue. The shorts, the socks, it's red and.
Yeah, but
blue.
it's like a navy. Even when the U.S. have gone with red kits, which isn't very prominent.
No, very rare.
It's a different blue, right?
It is.
I don't think of it the same way. Huh? Didn't expect to go down that road.
Yeah, I'm just offering up. plausibility for Ben.
No, I get that.
We're backing him up from last.
He is born in the U.S., but both him and I born in New York City.
Oh, Sam Adekugbe?
No, Jonathan David.
Oh, Jonathan David. Yeah, Brooklyn. Yeah, okay. Adekugbe's not born there, though.
No, I'm born in Manhattan.
Guy, a little Upper East Side over here. Okay.
I thought you would back your fellow 2000 born New York mans then.
Who's that?
Jonathan David.
David.
Okay.
Throwing Brendan into a tizzy here.
I don't know. There's 17 names here. Was the question like, does Daniel Jebbison deserve to start in 2026? I can't think that far down the road. But for right now, Larin's still the guy. So go back to the question. The partnership, though, I don't think that Jesse Marsch has. It just hasn't had enough of sample size, right, to know whether that's the one to lock into going forward for the next 18 months. But it's definitely the partnership to keep working with and working out right now. So that's how things fell.
I mean, off the top of my head, they started 7 together, Larin and David under Marsch, because it's, of course, the 2 friendlies in the first 5 games. And they scored, 3? No, 2, because it was 1 against Peru, 1 against Venezuela in those 7 games, as a team. And they got split up for Uruguay, and they scored 2 in that game alone. I'm not, that's, sample size, but I'm just saying, I think if you're Jesse Marsch, again, a lot of food for thought. I think the big thing to watch for Larin now is his club form. Because the harder discussion was, all right, the David-Larin partnership wasn't really working, but Larin's begging at club level, David's begging at club level, they're getting reps together. It's going to work. Now you're in a point where Larin's not begging at club level. It's at Mallorca, it's just been so weird. To start the year, he was a super sub, but then he had a good shift off the bench against Real Madrid, playing in that more left wing role he used to play for Besiktas. Funnily enough, maybe Mallorca's coach was like, all right, let's just go back to the well. Today, Larin played. He played left wing, so they went back to that old trick. I watched the game. He just struggled to get involved. He was just a bit off the pace. His touches were heavy. He was struggling to find any sort of separation. He was just kind of looked lost and sluggish out there. And that's a worry because Larin at his best, he's scoring goals. He's popping up in dangerous areas. And he wasn't even really popping up in the dangerous areas in this game. And I think it's at a point where his form's just continuing to drop and drop. He's not scoring. And then the reality is, once that happens, you're kind of hedging, he's the all-time leading scorer. He's going to score. That's in the past, right? It's been a while since he's been the one who stepped up and scored for Canada. And I think for Larin, it's a fascinating question from North Van Steve because when you look at what Daniel Jebbison's bring in terms of the profile, Theo Bair, after the season he's finding his feet at Auxerre. You can't forget JR. You can't forget Ugbo. It just feels like not only is the whole Larin and David thing not working, there's Larin's form, and then there's the reality that David probably fits better with all of those guys we mentioned, especially a Tanny, a Bear, or an Ugbo.
Is it Auxerre, or did you anglicize it for us?
Auxerre, technically it would be, but I just kind of anglicized it.
Just we learning from you, bro, so I just want to get it right.
And from Dan Clark, what do you hope to see from these 2 friendlies? Is it to see players who haven't featured get minutes, or is it to see how well the team is embracing Marsch's system, or something else? I think it's more of what we saw in that Uruguay game. Some new faces, new ideas, but also, working. Because you don't necessarily want to see failure at any point, even if it is in friendlies. But if you can get sort of, the ideal situation, which was that Uruguay game, good competition and good performances from across the roster, that's kind of the ideal scenario. But this is an opportunity to try some new things out. There's not many new faces you can try out. You've kind of seen everybody that's in the squad at this point outside of Sigur and Afrifa. But it's just sort of ironing out those details that Marsch wants in his team. And I think we saw potentially some of those new ideas against Uruguay. And there's going to be opportunities to see more of those new ideas, not necessarily the same way that they played in the big games at the Copa America.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that that's be a pretty good measurement, against those 2 sides that are the biggest rivals that they want to show that they can contend with. If they're able to play the way they were against Uruguay, that'd be a pretty good bar. I would like to see Mauricio Pochettino on the touchline. That's
Brendan's
just
made it clear.
that and everything Ben said.
Yeah, I'm a simple man. Honestly, I don't care really about the results in these friendlies. I think, of course, you don't want Canada to get blown out. I don't think you want them to get embarrassed. I think you want the performances to be good. But I'm not sitting there if Canada plays great and they lose 2-1, I'll be fine because they played great. Because ultimately, I think from these friendlies, I want to learn something. And I think it'll be good to learn some stuff ahead of the next competitive run. Because it's going to help Canada make a push for Nations League. Because that's the next goal, right? I think it's go out and win that Nations League trophy and I think Jesse Marsch did well to touch on that in his press conference. So for me, I just, the way that we learned that Moise Bombito was ready to be the starting center back in the last set of friendlies and some of those other things, I want to learn something like, is Mathieu Choignard ready to be a starter? Can Ali Ahmed be a starter? If you are going to go two up front, is there, is it going to be Oluwasi? Is it Bear, right? Which of those two earns a look? Is Jonathan Azori your best option at the number 10? All those. I want to learn something among some of those discussions. So that's probably the big thing I'm looking for.
And from Jordan Essie and Herbert McCullough, given Lopez's exclusion from the roster, should we be worried about our chances of convincing him to play for Canada? He had a really good youth performance with the Canadian U20s, and he could be the potential number 10 that we've been lacking for a while. Of course, Santiago Lopez was rumored to be in this team after a good performance at the CONCACAF U20s, but he doesn't get into the team, which, is a little bit of a surprise, but I don't think is also a massive surprise because he does have other options. But it did seem like Jesse Marsch had some interest in him at that point.
I think the interest will still be there, and they still have other international windows this year, right? I'm not worried about that. And you don't want to just load up on guys that you're trying to, swoon, because you still have other objectives, right? And to go back to Alex's point from a few minutes ago, you're still trying to get to know the guys that you've worked with a little bit, and you just don't know that well. So you don't want to throw too many new faces in there. I think Santiago Lopez has been on the radar for a while. I also think he's leaning this way anyway. I mean, he played, I forget how many appearances it was, but he played 2 or 3 youth levels for Mexico before accepting the call up to play for Canada. And, looking at the trajectory both of those programs are going on right now, I got a feeling that it's Canada that are in pole position here for his heart. So I think there'll be other opportunities. Fans shouldn't be too worried.
Yeah, I think for Santiago Lopez, I think it's something where there's not as much of a rush. They're assuming, of course, Mexico doesn't swoop in, but even then they can't really swoop in cap time till November, and I don't think they have any intentions of doing that for now. For what it's worth, and what you have to remember is the rumor that came out of Mexico is that Santiago Lopez would be invited to Canada as a training player, the same way Gregor Swiderski was. I think that makes a lot of sense, and of course the door is open for that. Now, they could still do it before, invite him in as a training player. Of course, the door is open for that in October. I think that makes a lot of sense because ultimately I think you want to bring him in. If he's ready to cap time, of course, he cap time and, let him develop and bring him in down the road. But he is definitely someone to look at. But I thought Jesse Marsch's comments were interested just from the press conference. He said he initiated contact with Santiago Lopez after seeing his U20s. But then he said they're going to leave him with Pumas for now and just look and let him kind of develop and do his thing there because he said the people he spoke with at Pumas are very positive and about him and his future at the club. And also one thing that stood out from what Marsch said is that from Marsch's conversations, he kind of felt that he valued playing for Canada. He really valued his U20 experience. So Marsch isn't too worried about him, needing to feel Canadian, wanting to represent Canada. I think because of that, it's just waiting for that right moment now and getting him in. So I'm not too worried. We'll keep an eye on Mexico because we know the way they like to operate and swoop in. But as it stands, I'm not worried. I guess we'll come back on these comments in a few months.
The thing to watch is if he gets more minutes and he's lighting it up and he's a headline guy and highlight reel maker for Pumas, then there's reason to be worried because Mexico have a reason to get him in there. But I do think his heart is leaning towards here. This is not a Marcelo Flores situation that people are worried about, who's also a highlight reel guy. And when he gets on, he's definitely worth watching. You can see why Mexico were so quick to cap tie him.
And from Sivan Prasad, any updates on Zachary Broguillard at Lugano, and how would you see a pathway back to the national team for him? I've always rated the player and would love to see him back in the fold.
Yeah, say for Broguillard, he's just been, plugging away at Lugano. He started their first league game of the season. He's kind of been in and out of the squad. He didn't really play too much during their European qualifiers, which is a bit disappointing. Kind of wanted to get a closer look at him in that, but he ended up being on the bench. So I think for Broguillard, the best path is just to keep his head down and become a regular at Lugano, win that spot since he's clearly in a bit of a rotational spot. From there, it's still going to be tough because I think Johnson and Larea, unless anything happens, they're there for now and they're you too. But for Broguillard, just be ready in case of an injury, be ready in case of an opportunity. And for what it's worth, Larea was used a lot out wide as a winger in this Copa America. So if the winger depth is low and Larea is asked to do that, that spot opens up. You go from there. So hopefully, just keeps his head down.
Yeah, the best thing to happen to Broguiar is to get out of Montreal, right? Like, but right now, he's not as out of sight, out of mind as maybe some people fear. But in reality, like, he wasn't doing enough, I think, at Montreal to improve his standing in the national team kind of setup, given all of the competition that he has. So Lugano's pretty sweet. And that they have one of the best crests.
So nice.
Eh? Like, that's a good baseball. If your logo looks good on like a hat, to me, that's the measurement for like how good the design is. Like, that's BVB level good hat. Like, that's one of those hats you're like, is that a soccer hat? You'd have baseball heads looking at that hat. That's a good logo, Lugano.
That's one of the better ones, and I'm actually going to get a chance to see some Swiss League action later this year. I'm going to be in Lausanne for the Lausanne Half Marathon, which coincides with them facing Grasshopper, which should be cool. So I'll see Mathieu Chouanière.
Actually,
oh mon Dieu!
And you should, if you're in Lausanne, you can go out to the second division, go watch Lucas Paas with the Lausanne Stade Ouchy as well.
Wow, you love soccer, eh? like deep cuts. You're definitely gonna find some Swiss Pro League in the middle of. You're not drinking coffee on your runs, are you?
Not during the run.
Not during the run. I'm just thinking, run to a stadium. Like, you'll be breaking into some stadium for sure. It'll be on your Instagram story. No, I didn't mean you were stealing a match. Just like that's a game that isn't going on. Oh, doesn't everyone break into a stadium at some point? Like, I've been to Belenenses Stadium in Lisbon, broken twice. No game going on. I just
want to check it out.
I mean, I guess in reality, if nobody comes and kicks you out, does that mean
you broke in?
You broke in?
Is it you get broke in if you get caught?
Yeah, I guess it's only if you get caught. Right?
Yeah.
But I just walked up, took a seat, took some pictures, walked out. Twice.
Huh.
So if you're in Western Lisbon, give it a go. Let me know if security's any better.
You know what I can't wait for when Ben goes? Can't wait for like us to get a text at I guess about like 2-3 a.m. and like the or something like that, and Ben's just gonna be like, look who I saw, and it's like a picture of him at a game, and it's like some like MLS guy who played half a game for the, I don't know, like Sporting KC in the 2012 season, and now he's plugging away, and he's like, look at this guy, like he's still plugging away.
100%. I would the 3 a.m. text, the 3 a.m. text. You'll never guess who I saw in this cafe, and it's like Pamadou Ka, who just was over there for some footballing reason. Just you happen to catch him. It'll be something like that. Kakuta Mane, someone else.
So we need like a list of MLS alumni in the Swiss league. So it's just the odds of Ben running into him just feels high.
Is Kakuta Mane over there now?
No. That was way
what
back
happened
when.
to him?
He's just chilling, free agent.
Free agent. Oh man. Vancouver Island wasn't the spot, eh?
I guess not.
Well, that does serve as a nice segue into some free agent talk from Afrikaans. Thoughts on the new NWSL CBA? Could this be a test run for further North American leagues? Of course, their new CBA is giving up the college draft, which took me by a little bit of surprise to see NWSL give up the college draft, given the amount of talent that we see in NCAA soccer and the pathway that the draft has had, and also opens up free agency as well to players that haven't necessarily had the service time that we see in both MLS and NWSL free agency, where things can get very complicated. But a new CBA in the NWSL, and a game-changing one, I think.
Say about time is what I'd say for a lot of it. Like, it just makes so much sense. Like, the one that just almost makes me laugh, but then it also, if you think about it, it's like kind of sad, is like the player consent for trades. Like, it's just so ridiculous that that's a thing where you can just be like, all right, we don't want you to get traded out, because ultimately, like, it's a contract, right? Like, if you got to negotiate and ask the player, and if the player wants to stay, they can stay. I mean, you see it all the time, right? Where it's situations where it can be a bit awkward. But I think that's like great to have that, and I think it's going to really potentially set a precedent, because I think if you're MLSPA, you're sitting there looking like, okay, why not us? Especially if MLS wants to take that next step, like that's going to be something where that's players. If you want to attract top players to make it a top league, you want to be able to have better free agency to reconfigure the trade system so it's not as wild, and you have guys like who sign for Miami. It's a beautiful spot, and then 2 years later they get traded to pick your rural urban MLS team in the Midwest, right? Like that's just it's not how it flies.
You were thinking of Salt Lake and Kansas City.
I don't want to throw them under the bus because I feel
rural urban place in the Midwest that's less desirable than other places. Notice he didn't say Denver. Okay.
Yeah, was that? But
it's part of the evolution, I think, right? I mean, we've said for years that the MLS draft is not what it was when Maurice Edu was taken first overall out of Maryland by an expansion MLS team in Toronto, right? Its significance is different. Its significance is greatly diminished. It's an American system that worked well for the league at the time and worked well for, I think, the relationship that MLS had with the NCAA and also the importance that the NCAA had. Now, I think, and this is, I would love to have been in some of those rooms when they were talking about this. I wonder if the NWSL recognizes the value that comes from the NIL system, how you don't want certain teams that have to like wait for a draft order to get this player. Like the player is winning here. Because if these women's players still go the NCAA route and still, get the most out of it and get an education out of it, and have the opportunity to grow their brands with NIL deals and become bigger names, then you've got NWSL teams like swooping in to pick the most appealing free agents from that pool. Like I think that's better for everybody. I think it's better for the players, better for the clubs.
And Alex, you also mentioned the importance of player control in terms of vetoing a trade and stuff like that. And I think that's even more important in a league like the NWSL or any of the pro women's leagues, because it's the U.S. and reproductive rights in the U.S. and you don't know where that issue is going to go. That's something that's important not only in the NWSL for those players to keep their reproductive rights and maybe not go to a market that those places are more restricted. But also, you can look at MLS or any of the men's pro leagues and, players should be advocating for their partners, should they be in straight relationships. And that's something that I think should be, considered by these leagues that hasn't been considered in the past. And at this time, especially in the U.S. election, if it goes the way that, it went in 2016, it's something that, that has to be considered.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there's a lot of things for these teams and these leagues to consider, and there's historically that sadly that hasn't been as high on the list as it should be. But these are different times, and yeah, you're right. It should be a consideration. You're right to bring it up. I just think that at the time, and I'm trying to think of states other than Tennessee, and Tennessee doesn't have an NWSL team right now. But that have as restrictive policies in place at the moment. It's one of the things about the pro game and the women's pro game that makes it very unique in North America.
Well, it's ultimately I get why a lot of these mechanisms were put in place because you want parity, but
previously, yeah.
But parity ultimately doesn't. You're not getting a top level league, especially in soccer, with parity. It works when you own the top hockey league in the world, or you own the top basketball league and you put parity and everyone watches it and etc. The reality is, if you want to compete, you gotta you gotta take away some of these restrictions, and also player control is a big one, because ultimately these players, they're not it's I just think of what my dad always says when he hears someone gets traded. He's like, what are they, cattle? They're just getting herded off to we don't want you here, we're just going to send you across the country.
Yeah. But that's a North American thing, and that's exactly why these leagues have a draft, and why
because if you think
that's not abnormal.
You think about it, it's ridiculous. It's like, oh, you're the best at your job. Like, you're the best doctor in the country, and you want to pick where you go. And they're like, all right, you got to get drafted. Oh, you got drafted to the hospital and somewhere in Alabama. And you're just like, what the heck? Like, it's just, if you think about it, it just makes no functional sense from the sense of the worker. And especially, it's like, I think that's why a lot of top promising Canadians and Americans are like, no, let's screw this NCAA system, screw this draft. Let's go straight to Europe and kind of take some control of our careers. And I think that's going to be huge, because now, not only are you going to attract more international players, I think it's going to be great for keeping more domestic players at home. And I think that's the quiet win you don't really realize, because you see some of these young, I think from an American perspective, Lily Johannes is one where she at Ajax looks like a great player. Imagine someone like her at 16, 17 playing in her home country, Except that really wasn't a possibility for her. She had to go to Europe, and play for Ajax, and Ajax ends up winning. It's great for the player, and you realize some of the hitches. So I think that's something to watch, especially with NSL, because you have to remember the NSL, they're kind of already on a lot of this stuff where player consent for trades is already a thing. They don't really sound too hot on the idea of a draft. I think I feel like NSL being kind of smart from the get-go can really help them maybe skip some of the growing pains they'll have as a new league, obviously.
And financially, they're already competing, right? Or they're close enough. They're certainly competing with some of the European leagues that we talk about, and the European leagues that we're seeing Canadian players and American players leave to come play in NWSL. So there's a lot of good things to be excited about NSL as well. And you say they get to kind of learn from the mistakes maybe that NWSL has made and come out the gate with a lot of things right or modernized.
And just on that as well, fake name Von Anonymous, great Twitter username, by the way. Is there any plan to get a national team level player on each NSL team? And we've also heard some stadium news as well. Ottawa Rapid to play at TD Place, which was pretty well expected. Looks like AFC Toronto are going to be out at York Lions Stadium, which is not the best. And Vancouver is also rumored to be going to use Swangard as a venue, but that's not set in stone just yet. But on the use of a national team player, which I don't think is necessarily going to be what happens. It was the plan at the outset, but I think when you're looking at where the national team is at, where the players are at, you're not necessarily going to get those players in the first year. But I do think you're going to start to see some of the national team players. You will see nationally capped players, and I think that's going to be the way they get off with it. But it's not going to be players that are regularly within that squad.
I mean, year one, a brand new league, and yes, they're setting a very high standard. I think there's going to be a lot of international talent and names that we know that you might be surprised by. I think that maybe that'll be, I don't want to say more of the win, but that will be more of the eyebrow raiser. We're like, there'll be players from all over. I think that are able to have a pro career in Canada with the NSL, and I think that there will be a lot of Canadian internationally capped players. But current players or players that are very in the mix still presently, I don't think there'll be too many of those. I agree.
I think if I were to project, I don't think anyone number 1 to 14 from the national team is making it in. I think it's going to be number 15 to like
28
and above is where the threshold is.
Yeah.
And I think the key is just figuring out what works best, because of course in that threshold are veterans, right? Like your Sinclairs, your Schmidts, your Chapmans. I think if you can get players like that, marketable, well-known, of course that'd be a huge boost to any team to get. Or I'm curious to see the real smart team is, just thinking about it, where Olivia Smith was 2 years ago before she made the jump to Portugal, where on paper you look now, maybe if all goes to plan, you could argue that the NSL, the way it's projected to set up the salaries, that it would be a better landing spot for a young player than Portugal. Can you get that Olivia Smith, who is on the cusp at that time? And I think that's going to be the NSL team that really thrives. They'll get a really good player, and maybe that player pushes into that top 15 on the national team, or they move elsewhere for a big fee, or it just brings the profile. So that's kind of my bet, is that they're going to be a lot of those veterans and those young players. And I'm curious to see who kind of strikes that best balance and finding the next maybe kind of Smith level player, because there's a bunch on the youth national teams, and I thought it was very interesting to hear Labe kind of hint that we're going to look at players who've been to youth World Cups, hint at players that are in that youth level, because I think if they can strike the right ones, like players that would maybe gone NCAA, that'll be a big coup.
And they got a few in the backyard, right? There's a few that we saw in the W Champions Cup with the Whitecaps girls elite team. So as long as Halifax, get a few stars so that they don't fold in 2 years, like Ben's real pessimistic prediction that they're going to have the hardest time assembling a team. You didn't say they would fold in 2 years, but you did say it was going to be deathly hard for them to put together a competitive squad over the next century. I think that was what you said last week, right? Not exaggerating?
No, you're not exaggerating. And just quickly on your thoughts about the stadiums and where these teams look like they're going to be playing.
Yeah, I'm not overly excited about AFC Toronto playing at York, which isn't confirmed. They're doing an announcement for a stadium on Wednesday. So maybe by the time you listen to this, that's already been confirmed. But as we're recording, we're just speculating based off the video, which showed someone getting on the subway in downtown Toronto.
So they did show some blurred out photos that are not so blurred out, and it's pretty clearly York Lions. So.
Okay, all right. So then I totally missed that. All right, so there you go. York, I don't like it. It's too far. Bad. I would have loved varsity. I thought Lamport was actually going to be the mix, which I didn't particularly love. But, it's a decent venue. It's hard, man. It sucks that it's hard to get to. That shouldn't be an excuse. But it's a reality in Toronto, man. Traffic, even though it's connected to the subway and, it's easy enough to drive to, that drive sucks. And I just don't think enough people from York region are filling up the stadium up there. And that's really who you're catering to. You're not catering to Toronto. So I think they might find it hard to fill that stadium because everybody else has found it hard.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the big worry because I like the Swangard idea. What's fascinating, it sounds like there could be some plans to maybe make Swangard a little bigger and put it in that kind of 5-10K range, which would be fantastic. Because that's kind of what you want for this. Ottawa, like you've seen what it's done for Atletico Ottawa. I think TD Place is a good choice. It's a good location. Having been to Ottawa, it's nice right near the Bar District, super well. We don't have any news on Halifax, but surely it's going to be Wanderers Grounds. Yeah, that's great. We don't have to explain too much about that. Like, what do those three all have in common, right? Good locations. They've, had a good history of teams in the past, getting good numbers there between Fury and Atletico, between the Wanderers, and between, of course, all the iterations of the teams that have played at Swangard. The York Lions one is a huge worry, and I'm very curious to know how they market it, because I think a downtown Toronto women's soccer team, I think that could have, especially right now, it could have been a very good hit year one, and now it's going to they're going to have a lot of work to do to get people out to York.
Yeah, it just sucks they couldn't play at a varsity stadium in particular, because that's a very similar stadium to what York Lions offers, and it's right downtown. It's right, down the street from where I live. But I think that could have provided a ton of excitement for just women's sport in Toronto, especially with the excitement around the WNBA coming. They're, of course, going to likely play downtown, or at least at the Coca-Cola Coliseum, which is effectively downtown right across from BMO. And then, you have the PWHL that's downtown at Mattamy or at Coca-Cola or even at Scotiabank. So, to have the other women's team in the city really be the other women's team in the city is not a good starting point for AFC Toronto, I don't think.
I think the goal for AFC Toronto the long-term goal should be to be big enough to get into BMO. Mm-hmm. That you are being literally invited to BMO because it needs to be in that big of a venue, right? And I think that would be a great spot and a great goal. And you look at Ottawa already at TD Place. I really do think. And from being at the event, which was a hotel right next to BC Place, there will be Vancouver Rise FC games at BC Place. That would be great if that was a full-time venue in a few years, right? I know it's difficult to book that place, and for as long as the Argos are playing at BMO Field, it'll be very difficult to get another team in there as well. But that should be the goal: is to for AFC Toronto build to a point where there's demand for you to play at BMO, and it's going to be hard to do being up there at York, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we've got for episode 190 of the Northern Fútbol Podcast here on the Nation Network. Alex and Brendan from the Wall Center studio in Vancouver, and myself from my home studio in Toronto. But thanks so much for tuning in, and make sure to rate, review, subscribe, follow, all that jazz, and we'll be back next week.